But we're going to end our day with our keynote speaker, Jeffrey Altschul. The topic of his talk is called The Past, Present, and Future of American Archaeology. So Jeff Altschul is co-founded two cultural heritage management consulting firms, Statistical Research and Nexus Heritage, and is currently serving as the president of the SRI Foundation and the co-president of the Coalition for Archaeological Synthesis. Since 1975, he has served as the principal investigator on more than 1,000 cultural heritage management projects across North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. He's the past treasurer and past president of the Society for American Archaeology, as well as a past president of the Register of Professional Archaeologists and a former Archinhist board member. This could be you in the future. Journals. Including the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, American Antiquity, Advances in Archaeological Practice, Ex Novo, Conservation and Management of Archaeological Sites, Public Archaeology, Heritage Management, Journal of Arizona Archaeology, and Ancient Mesoamerica. Some publications on Southwest archaeology include Fragile Patterns, the Archaeology of the Western Papaguria, and the role of synthesis in American archaeology and cultural resource management as seen through an Arizona lens. So if we can give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker for the day, Jeff Altschul.
It's a great honor to be here. I know, the number one thing about a keynote at the end of the day is to be the segue to the bar quickly. I came to the Southwest for a field school 50 years ago this year, 1973. I went to a place called Vernon, Arizona, up by Snowflake, and I worked on a site for a graduate student named Dave Wilcox. And the field school was run by a guy named Paul Martin, and so basically in that you have almost the entire archaeology of Arizona encapsulated. Now, 50 years ago, we thought we knew a lot of stuff. It's amazing how much stuff we thought we knew. We knew, for example, that humans came into the New World through the Bering Straits, and once the ice bridge was broken, they were able to come down, and they got here around 10 to 12,000 years ago. We just knew this. This was stuff we knew. We also knew that agriculture came into the Southwest a little bit before the Hohokam, and about 2,000 years ago. This wasn't really too much in debate. Those are just two things, and they're both wrong. In fact, almost everything I learned in graduate school is wrong. And so now we know that humans were here at White Sands 23,000 years ago. They were at the tip of South America 20,000 years ago. It is much more complicated. We know agriculture came into the Southwest 4,000 years ago, and both the plateau and into the desert. We know these things largely, or in part, because the American public passed a series of laws in the 1960s, the Congress did, that, as Jess Jennings, a very famous archaeologist from Utah, once said, what those laws basically did is required us to look in places that we knew not to look in. And what we found all sorts of stuff. So the Hohokam weren't just a riverine society based on irrigation in Phoenix. The Saltila project showed that they were pretty much everywhere. And agriculture, we found sites here on the Santa Cruz and up on the plateau, projects, and in this case, the interstate widening, that showed not only that agriculture came in, but it was relatively sophisticated. It wasn't just these foragers who were throwing seeds on the ground and coming back in an annual cycle. They really were dedicated. So the whole idea of agriculture and the whole idea of how humans related to the environment changed. And I could go on and on. There, basically pick a topic. I could tell you how wrong we were, and why we were wrong was largely because, as archaeologists, we had focused on questions of our interests, and when we responded more to the, we were forced to look outside that small area of interest. Well, a lot has changed in 50 years. Our understanding of the past, how we do archaeology, and the funding of archaeology. All those things have changed almost 180 degrees. And my career has paralleled that. I was a student. I went from academic training to a CRM archaeologist, to a cultural heritage specialist, to back again to a nonprofit trying to utilize information from both academia and applied research. I've seen the discipline as a student, as a CRM archaeologist, as a business owner, as a establisher of not-for-profits, and I've also had, as mentioned, a number of leadership positions in the discipline. So I'm going to talk today about some of those things and how they've changed. And so I'm going to do a couple things. The first thing I'm going to do is define the terms that have been used for a couple of hours, at least how I'm going to use it. So what's archaeology? What's cultural heritage? What's this thing that we've talked about called cultural resource management? So I'm going to talk about what CRM encompasses and what it is that a CRM professional does. I will talk a little bit about the economics and demographics of American archaeology. And then, if you're interested in a career in CRM, how you might explore that. And then, I'm not going to go, I did say I was going to say something like what the next 50 years holds, but I'll limit it to the next 5 to 10 years. So, let's start with some definitions. What's archaeology? Well, to me, archaeology is a set of techniques and theories in which we can make sense of the past, that we can bring claims to bear and data to bear on those claims. We can use the scientific method by which we can refute or find those or refine those things, and most importantly, that we can let others look at our work and come to their own conclusion, bring their own data to bear, and to refine those claims we are making against the evidence to create this narrative of the past. Cultural heritage is how the past is used in the present. Everybody does this. And it has no necessary relationship to an evidence-based narrative. People sometimes use archaeology to support their idea of who they are, how long they've been here, their claims to a place, but they don't always, and they don't always have to have it right. Cultural heritage is not about actually bringing evidence to bear. It's a belief. Cultural resource management is a service in which you bring entities, whether they're public agencies or private companies into compliance with laws protecting the historic fabric. In this country, and how you define what it is you're trying to protect varies from country to country. So they can be tangible things like old buildings or archaeological sites. They can be like songs, poems, food, language. In this country, in the United States, we focus on tangible resources. They're called historic properties. The Supreme Court has stated you have to be able to draw a boundary around them to be considered. Now, resources can have values that are intangible, but they must be able to be placed on the landscape. Outside the United States, that's not it's not true in most countries. Intangible resources can have no boundaries. They can be various parts of belief systems. They can just be what people value. So outside the country, outside the US, the service is generally called cultural heritage management. So what do CRMers do? We heard this panel, and I think they did a terrific job. But it's important to note that CRM is more than just digging square holes in the ground and walking transits. It is part and parcel of archaeology, anthropology, history, architecture, both historic architecture and architectural history. It's education, it's laws, it's city planning, and it's working with local indigenous and descendant communities. What in this country is called consultation. In the law, there was discussion about the difference between consultation and collaboration, and that's very apt in cultural resource management. In the service for the law, the focus is on consultation. God, that was the whole page. In a career path, I said I started as a CRM archaeologist, and then I started a company, and I did all sorts of things very quickly. All of a sudden these buildings and ruins I had to get interested in. I had to get interested in how we talk to the public. I had to get interested in taking a client who had a specific agenda, say building a development, and walk them through the law, act as their agent, liaise with regulators, whether city, state, local, tribal, and design a program by which they met their compliance and were able to proceed with their project. So rarely did I do archaeology, to be honest. Once I stepped over to that side, basically I was doing other things. So when you enter CRM, I remember, just as an aside, when I was going to graduate school, and I told one of my professors that I was going to do this. I got trained in Mexico. I went to Mexico and I worked there, and I talked about what I was doing. And he said, I don't really care, because 20 years from now, God knows what you'll be doing. And it may or may not relate to anything that you do here. And I remember 20 years later, I was in Krakow, in Poland, in the city square, and I was I was having a beer in the beer garden with a friend, and we had done very similar dissertations. I had worked on identifying ancient social neighborhoods in the ancient city of Teotihuacan. He had done the same thing on Roman cities in Northern Europe. And neither of us, 20 years later, were doing anything remotely close to that. I was running a CRM firm. He was the cultural heritage manager for the country of Belgium. And he was more concerned about vernacular architecture than Roman sites. But that's the point. In CRM, it's a huge field, and you're able to maneuver in it, and one of the great exciting things about it is that you don't have to, where you enter that maze is, you can direct yourself in many different directions. You can do what I do, which was in the private sector. You could be a federal archaeologist or county or a regulator who actually implements the laws and advocates for the public. You can work in museums. You can do all sorts of things. So CRM archaeology differs a bit from, I mentioned what archaeology is, which is basically a set of methods and theories about understanding the past and bringing data to bear on those claims. In academia, I think why I think my colleagues are attracted to it is that you direct that. You decide where to dig or where to survey. You get to think about the problems you're going to research. You got to get money for that, but I think you feel in control of the kinds of issues you can study. In CRM, the big difference, of course, is the project area is defined for you. A developer has a development, a road has a project, a pipeline has to be done. And so the resources are often defined not because of archaeological, they're never defined because of archaeological interest, or I'll just say rarely. But you go where you go. And that's both exciting and can be somewhat frustrating. But you also get what you get. So you can do pre-contact sites, you can do ethno-historic sites, you can do historic sites, you can do them all on the same project. And so you're much more flexible in that way. The other thing is who gets a say in what you do. If you go to the National Science Foundation, you write a research design, you tell them what exactly you think about what the problem is, how you're going to attack it, what you're going to do. In CRM, even in consultation in CRM, you don't do that. You are part of a process that allows various stakeholders, it's a bad word, but more interests. So the developer, the regulator, the state, the local community, and yes, descendant or local or just interested groups get to be at the table. And they get to help construct what are the research questions we're interested in. What are the methods we're going to use? To some extent, how much effort is going to be done. And so it's not, I won't say it's collaborative, that would be a bridge too far, but it is consultative in that you bring information to bear and other people have a say in what it is you study and how you study it. And some archaeologists, particularly my generation when they started, that was a deal breaker for them. And I can tell you, 50 years later, some of the most exciting projects I had were on questions that never would have occurred to me, but were important to others. And it was my job to help them think about what it is they wanted out of this project and how archaeology, if archaeology or history or some allied discipline was going to be able to deliver on those kinds of issues, and how to do it, and how to present it. Not just yes, you write a technical report, but how do you present it in a way that other communities can appreciate it? I always enjoyed that quite a bit. And then the other difference between academic and CRM, particularly if you work overseas, you will find you're more of an anthropologist than you are an archaeologist. I've done probably hundreds of community workshops overseas, and communities are interested in preserving their vestiges of the past, but they're often very focused on their intangible issues. You know, how are they going to keep their silversmith tradition alive? How are they going, and I worked a lot in Mongolia, how are you going to remain nomadic in a country that is developing? How do we keep our teenagers interested in wearing traditional dress as opposed to Michael Jordan t-shirts? You do a community meeting, you hear lots of stuff. And cultural heritage lies in that space often between economic development and change in society and communities who want to control their future. And so, again, I found that very refreshing, that was a very exciting part of my career. I didn't do a heck of a lot of archaeology, but it was a very interesting set of techniques that you had to use. In the Gobi, probably one of the biggest deals is they're scared to death the Chinese are going to come in and steal their dinosaur eggs. And so paleontology becomes a cultural heritage, which I didn't know anything about paleontology outside of Jurassic Park. And here I was going to all these paleontological sites, and it was exciting. I enjoyed it. So, why would I want to do CRM? Well, okay, and I think the people in the panel who spoke to me were alluding to this. One thing is you might want a job, and you might actually want to work. So, okay, here are the numbers. 1968, the National Science Foundation funded $1.7 million of research in the archaeology and archaeometry program. The Federal Archaeological Report to Congress reported that federal agencies like the Forest and BLM, et cetera, spent $1.7 million on, they didn't call it cultural resource management, but that's what it was. So they were equivalent. That's about $15 million in today's dollars. Okay, I added this up yesterday. In 2023, the National Science Foundation Archaeology and Archaeometry projects made $7.3 million of awards in grants. $5.5 million went to the senior research grants, which is what most people are focused on. That's what, you know, if you're doing academic research, that's what you're talking about. $1 million went to archaeometry, like the Tree Ring Lab always gets money from NSF. That's a couple $100,000. There are several labs around the country. That's $1 million of funding. And the other $750,000 or so went to what they call dissertation research grants. And so that's it. That's what you get for NSF. It is a decrease in funding from 1968, total of about 50%. And if you just look at senior research grants, it's about 60, it's more than 60%. And it gets even worse because in 1968, universities took 20% overhead. Today they take about a third or more. So it's a the track for academic research funding has been going down my entire career, and you keep thinking you hit bottom, but we don't know. Okay, CRM was at 1.7 million, which translates to 15 million today. My estimate today is that we spend $1.6 billion in CRM. That's a 10,000% increase. So you don't have to be, I mean, the numbers and the trends are pretty dramatic. Even if you think that, and I'm guessing that old buildings are about half that. So it's about 800 million in archaeology and CRM. And that's conservative. I won't go into, it's a conservative number. The point being that even if you applied a 100% overhead charge, you'd still be spending 400 million in CRM just to do field archaeology, as opposed to a much smaller number in academia. That's just the deal. NSF isn't the only funder of academic research, but when I did the numbers, the total number of academic research funding available in the U.S. is around $45 million. And if you take out a third of it, it gives you $26 million worth of power to actually do research. Okay, that's just numbers. You look at the demographics. So the total number of CRM professionals floating around today is around 19,500. My co-author and I, Terry Klein, argue about 11,500 of those are archaeologists. And of those, so 11,500 are archaeologists. Academia, I did a paper a while back with Tom Patterson, who studies the academic market, and he said there are about 1,800 to 2,000 archaeologists in academia. So essentially, if you think there are somewhere around 13,500 archaeologists in the United States getting paid, those are full-time equivalents, and 11,500 are in CRM, you're seeing about 85% of all archaeologists in CRM. And there's a long way of saying, when I started, that number was reversed. 85% of archaeologists, when I came to Vernon, were working at universities. So that's just been the changing face of American archaeology over my lifetime. We talked a little bit about, some people were talking about training or about education. In 2024, I estimated that there are 1,000 new CRM job openings, of which 750 are in archaeology. And of those, about 500 would require or would probably privilege those with masters and PhDs. And we say masters and PhDs. the honest truth, in the United States, you don't need a PhD to do archaeology. In fact, it might actually be a detriment if you're doing CRM. Overseas, you gotta have one. You just can't go to Mongolia or where I worked in Africa and run a project. So it depends what you want to do. In any event, I said there were something like 500 openings for MAs and PhDs. Total number of people trained in the being awarded degrees in in archaeology is a little less than 300. So if all those PhDs and MAs went into CRM, we still couldn't fill the jobs. That's just the truth right now. And I can tell you, if you go to the U of A, they're not training CRM archaeologists, they're training tenured professors. So a whole bunch of those PhDs aren't interested in a CRM job. But as some people found out, they actually do work for me. So I believe my analysis on the forecast for this decade is that trend is going to hold, and a lot of it's based on the fact that we passed recently the infrastructure bill, which adds $1 billion of archaeological projects, and my analysis did not. The Inflation Reduction Act was not passed. That's probably close to $1 billion. It depends. All those wind and solar farms in the West that need permits are going to have to go through the NEPA and Section 106 process. So, yeah, it's a significant amount of work over this decade. And so those trends are going in the wrong direction. And when I talk to some of the deans and provosts around the country, and even the departments of anthropology, particularly from the Research 1 schools, they're not, I don't know, I haven't asked, I did ask and I forgot the answer, but I don't think the U of A is accepting graduate students at the moment because they don't, PhDs, because they can't place them. And so it's always this, okay, so you're training people to do this, but the jobs are here. And that's true across the country. And I could talk a little bit about training, but I'm not going to unless you ask. Okay, so that's why you might become a CRM archaeologist, or why you might get exposed in the sense that you need a job and you're looking around and this is okay, this is what I do. But why would you stay? Why would you want to make this your career? And I'll tell you how I think about it. I got into CRM. I chose CRM over academia. So I was one of the, I wasn't the only one, there were others, but it was very exciting in the 1970s because the law was new, and for the first time our society was asking archaeologists, they were taking us seriously. They were saying, we need to balance economic development with historic preservation. We need to identify the important things in our culture and our past, and we need to protect them in light of the fact, in the 1960s in particular, of all this development, post-war development, particularly in the cities. And it was, honestly, the law was focused on historic buildings in the 1960s. It wasn't about archaeology. But there was a huge concern. So I was up for it. I wanted to be relevant. I wanted to help this country make those kinds of decisions. And that's true today. You might be interested because you're interested in collaborative research, like you heard about. You know, that why people are interested in the past for their own reasons. And we have an important skill that might actually allow them to connect with their heritage in a way that is important and helpful. How to place themselves in relation to this spot on the landscape, and also their relationship with other people and to people within their group. So to me, that's a very powerful thing, that a powerful practice that I very much enjoyed. There's clearly a social justice aspect to this. One of the great things about archaeology is, history's told by the victors. History is told by those who win the wars and who are powerful. Archaeology, it's hard to lie about your trash. It just is. And one of the great things archaeology is a truth teller, And Bill Ratchey did this, and it applies today. It applies to the past. So there are, the projects, I'm sure you've all heard of them, the Indian schools and the grades of young kids who were just mistreated and disrespected, and how archaeology can be a powerful set of techniques to rectify those kinds of wrongs. I think that's a good reason. And all that's done in CRM. That's not, you're not finding research dollars necessarily, although you could. I shouldn't say no, but it's mostly done in CRM. And then there's the environmental justice part. We talked a little bit about this. I think Ian talked about it. The idea of co-management. This was the land of somebody before us, and they're still here, and they have ideas about how natural and cultural resources should be managed. And if you were working for an agency that had management responsibilities, allowing other voices in of local, indigenous, descendant communities to have a say in how those things are managed would be a very powerful, satisfying aspect of your career. I'm close to the end. So one of the things, and I was interested, it was one of your questions about, if I'm in, okay, so CRM's sort of interesting, how would I explore this? And, part of it, I believe, and Bill Doley and I have been writing about it for 25 years, is the need for internships. Because CRM can be taught, some of it. You can know the law and this and that. But so much of what CRM is experiential. There's nothing like going to Hopi Mesa and getting yelled at by a bunch of elders. It's an experience you'll never forget. And it's very powerful. And their idea of the past and their place in it, and how they want you to see it, and how you can craft a road project to assist them is something I think is something most people would enjoy. So, but you don't get that in school. You're only going to get that if you have an internship that's more than just stapling reports together. And I'm very strong on this. I don't think internships have to be of educational value. So when you look around for them, make sure they're going to give useful experiences and not just use you as cheap labor. The other thing that was mentioned was mentorships, because it always bugs me when someone comes out of a program and then just starts being exposed to CRM. You know, so if you wanted to court a lot of people in this audience could help here. To plot a career, how high up on the rungs do you want to go? Where do you want to work? Do you want to work just in the United States, just in the Southwest, or do you want to work wherever? There are a lot of people that can help plot that career choice and that career path. I'm not always convinced they're at the university. And so we need as a discipline to be more tied into that. But I'm a big believer in mentorships, particularly with people who will be supportive. The other thing that somewhat bothers me is when you're told what CRM is like by someone, say at a university, who has a very narrow view of what that is. And you really need to experience what that means. Sorry, Fran.
That's okay.
Okay, so the next 50 years, 5, 10, 50, I don't know. We're going to find all sorts of cool stuff because this country's pumping a lot of money into infrastructure, and there are going to be a whole lot of field projects. I mean, there's a huge project in Mississippi of a series, I think 10 Mississippian mounds. It's just going to transform what we know about Moundville and Mississippian culture, and that'll be exciting. There's two big data recoveries going on in Pennsylvania, and there's another one, if the bridge over the Columbia River between Portland, Oregon and Fort Vancouver ever goes, that's a series of Lewis and Clark sites. And Fort Vancouver is a national park, and it's going through it. So God knows there's going to be a whole lot of historic archaeology, as well as ethno-historic villages right around it. It's at the confluence of the Columbia and the Willamette, so it's going to be an interesting, and it's all early Portland. So 19th century Maya forestry, all sorts of cool stuff. And so on and so forth. And one of the things, if you had a mentor, one of the things I'd first say is, are you dedicated to the Southwest? Because if not, one of the great things about being young in CRM is you get to see a lot of archaeology. I saw the Midwest, the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest. I did archaeology all over the country. And I think it made me a better archaeologist, but it was fun. It was just a lot of fun. So I would encourage that. The other thing I think is in your careers, you're going to see a lot more of empowering local communities to take care of their heritage. I speak mostly about being overseas, where a lot of our work is trying to help local communities have a voice at the table and to take care of their own heritage, to identify and to take care of what is important for them to remain a viable community for their children. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in that field. And then there's collaborative research, which I think we've talked about, so I'm not going to belabor it. And with that, I am going to conclude. A little long, but I'm sorry, but thank you all for listening.